Thanks very much for joining us for episode 49 of InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. I'm joined by my co-host for this edition, InTek CEO Rick Lagore. Hey, Rick.
Hey there.
Been a little bit.
It's been a bit. Glad to be back.
Yeah. And so for this edition, as participants in the freight market, it's important to kind of know what's going on a day-to-day basis, week to week, month to month, and over time. And one of the best ways to do that out there today is the Logistics Managers Index, or LMI. And joining us is the head author of that index, Dr. Zac Rogers, Assistant Professor of Supply Chain Management at Colorado State University. Zac, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. And so before we get started on the LMI in particular, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background in the supply chain space.
Sure. Well, I was born into it in some ways. My father was a professor of logistics at the University of Nevada in Reno when I was growing up. And Reno is a lot of people, your first job, and this is true for me, is in supply chain somehow. So my first job out of school, and I actually avoided supply chain, by the way. I thought I don't want to do it. I'm gonna do economics or something. And then my first job out of school was as a buyer for a big casino. Because you can only either work at a casino, a mine, or a warehouse if you grow up in Reno. And I ended up doing 2 of the 3. And so I worked at a casino as a buyer, and I thought, well, this is a lot of fun, especially seeing my friends who were in sales and how hard they were having to work to get anything. And as a buyer, and this is 2010, so the recession was pretty bad at the moment, my life was easy. Things were great. And it was so interesting seeing all the different pieces of a big operation and how forecasting works and negotiate. I just loved it. And then after I was there about a year, and I realized, I should get out of this business. Again, it was the recession, and a tip for all the young listeners out there: if your paycheck ever goes from being signed by the name of your company to JP Morgan because they've repossessed the building, it's time for a career change. And that is what happened to me. And so I got a new job as a operations manager for a company called Quidsy, which is an e-commerce company started by Mark Laurie, who also started Jet.com and now owns part of the Timberwolves, I think. And within a few months of me being there, we were acquired by Amazon. So then subsidiary of Amazon for a couple of years. And after I'd been there about 3 years, I thought, gosh, maybe Dad was right. Maybe teaching this would be fun. And I'd kind of had this ground level view of things that were going on for 4 or 5 years. And I thought this would be something interesting to see at a more macro level, because my view as a purchasing person was so different than as an ops person and inbound logistics and returns. And I thought I want to know how this all sort of connects. And so I went to school at Arizona State and got my PhD in supply chain. And then I came to Colorado State after I graduated, and that was 8 years ago. So that's sort of, I worked in it, I grew up in it, and now I've been teaching it for 8 years. And what I found is I still don't totally get it. I mean, because I don't think anyone can. I've been working on it a long time, and I don't know that anybody really knows how complex global supply chains are, how all the pieces fit together. And, it's one of those things that's great about supply chains is there's always something new. And it's really like a butterfly flaps its wings in Kansas and there's a hurricane in Taiwan. It's really it's really a great, fun, interesting way to have a career.
And sometimes that hurricane makes a difference, and sometimes it doesn't. It's hard to tell.
Exactly. Yep.
So going back that 8 years you've been at Colorado State, I think the LMI is kind of tied into that 8-year window as well, right? So tell us sort of how it came about and how it goes about tracking the industry.
Yeah, so we launched the Logistics Index in September of 2016. I started at Colorado State in August of 2016, so we got it going quick. And I work on it with other faculty from Arizona State, Nevada, so both my alma maters are in there, as well as Rutgers and Florida Atlantic. And so the 5 of us started working on this a little more than 8 years ago. And the idea we had behind all of this was this could be sort of a complement to the PMI. So I'm sure everybody listening knows the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index, that was also started by professors at Arizona State University. And so ISM was down there, and when I was kind of in the summer finishing up, we went down to ISM and talked to them. Hey, how does the PMI work? How do you run this? And they really helped us figure out our methodology for the logistics index. They've been great friends and supporters of ours, and what we kind of thought is what we were adding, because of course the PMI is great, but the PMI is something that really was started in the 60s, and it's great if you want to measure manufacturing and inventories and sort of what you would think of are the old school sort of models of the economy, which still of course matter today. What we thought with the Logistics Managers Index was maybe we can sort of fill in the gaps that we don't have in terms of being a leading indicator. And the idea was, well, the U.S. is more of a service-based economy than a manufacturing economy, right? Things have really changed between 1961 and 2016 when we started this. And then also we thought, if something's going to be sold in the U.S., if something's going to be sold in November, well, probably it was on a truck in October, and maybe it was in somebody's inventory in September or August. And so what we've really found with this is that if you look at movements in transportation or inventory or warehousing capacity, all these things, you can get a pretty strong idea of where the overall economy is going, especially transportation. Transportation, as you guys know for sure, is like a dog chasing a squirrel around. It's over here, it's over there, it's up, it's down, it's all over the place. And so if you can sort of capture the fluctuations in the transportation market, you have a pretty good idea of what the fluctuations in the overall economy are going to be. The reason we thought this is because we knew that in 2006 and 2007, especially, a freight recession happened that sort of was a forerunner of the overall recession. Like suddenly things slowed down in 2007, and then we had the big recession in 2008, and that was just sort of anecdotal. And we thought, well, maybe there'd be a way to measure this over time, and that's what we've done. And it turns out there is a very strong correlation between changes in the logistics industry and the overall economy.
So at this point, the LMI is broken up between three pillars. You've got inventory, warehousing, transportation, and within those pillars, you've got a couple other breakdowns. Where do you capture that data? How do you bring that into the model and report those numbers out?
Yeah. So we have 8 metrics. So like you said, inventory, warehousing, and transportation. So within inventory, we track inventory levels and costs. And then within warehousing, we do utilization, capacity, and price. And then transportation, utilization, capacity, and price. And so every month what we do is we have a big, really nice respondent base who is a lot of them who have stuck with us all 8 years. And our respondent base is primarily made of folks who are director level and above, so who would have a 20,000 foot view of the supply chain, not lowly ops managers like I was. We talked to like my boss's boss, and so we ask them every month, and it's simple. So for one of those 8 metrics, let's say transportation capacity, is it going down? Is it staying the same, or is it going up? And then we assign a value to it. And basically the way our values work is if it's going up, then that's a number above 50. If it's going down, it's below 50. And if it's staying the same, it's right at 50. And so when you average all of these together, right? So it's just 0.5 and 1. We just average all these together. That gives us what's called a change index. And so really we say, okay, is it contracting or expanding? And then the further above 50 is, the faster the rate of expansion. Further below 50, the faster the rate of contraction. And of course, we do things like we'll flip capacity, because if capacity is 60, well, really that means that the market is slowing down, right? So we'll invert capacity, for warehousing and transportation. We sort of average all that together, and that gives us our numbers. And then we do other splits like upstream versus downstream firms, downstream being retail. And we've really seen a big divergence several times between upstream and downstream firms. We started it actually, the reason we started looking at both sides was in 2018 when FedEx reported really bad results, but the economy didn't go into recession, because it used to always kind of be like, well, if FedEx or UPS are doing badly, the economy is probably slowing down, but it wasn't. And here's what it was. We had a slowdown in the upstream economy, partly due to the trade war that was going on. So we put 25% tariffs on chips and big appliances and steel and aluminum and chemicals used in agriculture and things like that. And it slowed down upstream firms. So B2B stuff slowed down because of the extra cost, but B2C stayed really strong. And so the consumer economy was hot. And so what we're able to see is like, okay, well, the reason we're not going to recession is because the consumer is holding up the economy, even as everyone else slows down. We saw a very similar dynamic in 2022 when the freight recession that we are just coming out of now kind of started. In 2022, upstream activity dropped off a cliff. But the consumer, don't ever bet against the American consumer. We'll spend our way to the other side of anything you throw at us. And we kind of kept the economy floating. That's why we didn't have a full recession in 22, just a freight recession.
Lucky us.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but how does the LMI then is doing a pretty good job of then tracking when you see the index hitting this certain number going back to 22? You follow it going kind of down and down and down for a while, and now sort of I know we've been seeing it climb back up again for a few months now.
Yeah. So one of the things I think if you're really looking at, okay, how does this sort of predict the overall economy, is something we call a freight inversion. And so a freight inversion is we have a line for transportation prices and a line for transportation capacity. When prices are growing faster than capacity, maybe capacity is even contracting, that means we're in kind of a boom time. When that flips, when capacity is growing faster than price, because remember, transportation is the most reactive. Warehousing is much more contract-based. Inventory always has a lag because you build up inventories and then suddenly you need to get rid of it, but that might not be instantaneous. Transportation, those prices change every day, maybe multiple times every day by lane. I mean, it's a great barometer. And when those lines flip, that's when we kind of say, okay, something big is happening. And it's interesting because, as you alluded to a second ago, the lines did just flip. The lines flipped earlier this year, but in a different way than we've seen before. I think if you sort of look at the history of the index, we've had maybe 5 or 6 of these inversions happen. So we had sort of, in early 17 and 18, early 18, late 17, prices spiked up like crazy and capacity went down. That was really the tax cut that happened. That really, a ton of spending comes in and transportation got really hot. So it kind of went straight up the line for price. And then it came down again pretty hard when we had the trade war starting. And that inversion we saw was in like about March or April of 2019. But when transportation markets peaked were in May of 2018. The trade war started in June and July. So that's when it starts kind of coming down. And then we were in a freight recession through most of 2019, which, again, I think the average consumer had no idea. But we were in a freight recession all the way really from April of 19 until February of 20, because in March of 20, something happened. And let me remember what that was, March of 2020. So COVID happens, and we flip for a month, and that was basically pulling forward soup and toilet paper. Go back down for April and May when really lockdown was hardcore. And then in May, we get the stimulus happens. And so that stimulus comes in. So now we have $1 trillion. You can't spend it on services. You have to spend it on goods. And so goods need to move on a truck. And so then we saw maybe one of the biggest freight booms we've ever had. And once again, went straight up, and it goes all the way until February of 2022. And in February 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. And so now we take 1/12 of all the oil off the market. 2 of the 5 biggest, producers of wheat and oil go into a lot of things, it turns out. And that really made things expensive. Plus, we were already over inventoried. We had kind of had the classic bullwhip effect that you teach your sophomore supply chain students when you play the beer game. We needed to maybe have that lesson again for some of our shippers. And we had way too much inventory. And then we dropped you see this transportation line go up, and then it drops like a rock in basically March, April, May, June, and we go into this really long freight recession. What's interesting is that all 4 of those that I just described to you were really sharp inversions. Like suddenly, some external shock happened and the lines totally flipped. The flip we've seen this year is different. The flip we've seen is not we took off like a rocket. It was like we accelerated, like a car coming out of a light, just sort of slowly sped up. And we've seen now, I believe, 5 months in a row of transportation being above capacity, or prices being above capacity, but it's a much softer slope. It's a slope that it does not have this sort of shock element to it. And so because of that, this is a much different feeling recovery than we've had in the past. And the reason it's been, it's not that we don't have spending, it's that we built up so much capacity during the last boom that it's a really funny thing that's happening. We haven't had capacity contract yet. It keeps hitting 50. So it hit 50 in April, which remember is no growth, and then again in September. And then each time it bounced back up just a little bit. It bounced back up to like a 51, or this month in October, I think it was 50.8. And what that is all of this idle capacity that was sitting on the sidelines. So we built this capacity in the pandemic, and now it can come online because it sees prices going up again. And so what that's done is it's made it so we've had a really nice, easy recovery where prices haven't jumped up like crazy, which I actually think has allowed this to be a slightly more sustainable recovery and more inclusive. We see more activity from smaller firms in our index than we normally do in these because prices are reasonable and they're not being boxed out of the market the way they were during the recovery in 2020.
And I think in the last report for October, you even mentioned that there could be even a little bit more of that capacity that starts to enter back in as the prices continue to sort of sustain a little bit higher level.
There could be. Well, we actually saw more capacity come online in late October. So October 1st to the 15th, our capacity number was at 45, which is contraction. First time we've had contraction for half a month since like the summer of 22. And then it popped back up to 54.3 in the back half of October. And again, I think that's more capacity coming online, especially downstream to do like last mile delivery and things like that.
So we basically didn't have like the crazy catalyst. It's just been sort of
it's a natural
climbing.
Recovery.
Yeah,
which in many ways is probably more sustainable. Because it means that the recovery is happening not because of some outside shock, not because we injected, because those other two recoveries, right? It was either we injected $1 trillion with tax cuts or we injected $1 trillion with stimulus. This is not that. This is nature is healing. We're just having a regular sort of organic recovery that tells me it's not that we had, some outside shock. It's that the fundamentals of the economy are pretty strong. You got to tip your hat, I think, to the Federal Reserve. We've really had a softer landing than I think a lot of people thought was possible. And we have at the same time this happening, right? Unemployment is still down. We never had to go up to 6 or 7% like they thought. Interest rates are back to where we want them to be. And if you look forward in our index, our respondents are pretty confident that this is just the beginning of what's going to be a sustained period of growth.
So let's get to the elephant in the room then, because obviously the economy has been, we've had one administration for a while. Now we have the results of the election earlier this month that are switching things up, and there's some different, positions that are going to be taken probably as we go forward. So maybe some different policies. Obviously, you haven't surveyed the respondents since that yet, or you'll be starting to get that data in over the course of the next few weeks. What are your thoughts on the sustainability of the recovery with maybe a potential sort of shock to the system of the election?
Sure. Well, it depends on what the shock actually looks like. If you compare the campaign, kind of the idea was going into the last Trump administration versus what actually happened. What actually happened was milder than kind of what was said was going to happen on the campaign. And that's true with probably every presidential, candidacy ever. They say, here's my ideas at a 10, and then you come in around a 5 or a 6 when you run into, we got to deal with Congress and regulations and things like that. So to me, I would say, they haven't the Trump administration hasn't asked for my advice yet, but if they did, I would say, let's see this recovery happen for a little bit longer. Because right now we really are primed. One of the things I think we wrote in the last month's report was whoever gets elected, and I was writing this on Monday and then the election's on Tuesday, whoever gets elected is going to come into a great freight market and a great economy, and one that's really primed to grow in 2025. Like I said earlier, the trade war that we had with China put a dent in the freight market. Imports soak up a lot of volume. And that dent that we had in the market then was a fairly narrow raft of tariffs. I mean, it was a lot of tariffs, more than we'd had in the past, but it was 25% on, like I said, semiconductors, big appliances, agricultural chemicals, steel, and aluminum. And we've adjusted in the 4 years since then. Most of those tariffs still exist, by the way. It's not like the Biden administration took them all down. Now, what the Biden administration did on the chip side, at least, was, okay, they put in now carrots as well as the sticks to build up more of a domestic manufacturing base and things like that. A 60% across the board tariff for China, if that really happened, would be tough. And I think it would be inflationary. And let me just give you a number here. So in 2023, we imported $500 billion of goods from China. Okay. 501, but let's say 500 to make the math easy. So if we put a 60% tariff on that, that's what, an extra $300 billion in tariffs. So we're adding $300 billion in costs just to things getting through the front door. And then, of course, you would think, well, there will be some markup after those tariffs, maybe another 10% or something that gets passed down to consumers. And so if you think, well, there's about 300 million Americans, $300 billion extra in cost, $1,000. Maybe there's some extra on there. So maybe it's like closer really to 11 or 1,200. And then you think, well, some of those 300 million Americans are like my daughter who's 12 and doesn't buy a lot of her own things. And so then maybe you say, well, a family of 4, 2 spenders. So it's probably around, if it was just 60%, just the China part, not the 10% everywhere else, you're probably around $2,000 per sort of earner in the U.S. I think, and that probably lines up with some other estimates, and that's just me on the back of a napkin here. So if you have an extra $2,000 just to buy the things that we're buying already, that's inflationary. And it would be really a shame for us to put these tariffs on right when inflation has finally gotten under control, because, the Fed, no matter what, maybe the incoming president-elect thinks, the Fed is independent. And so if we see costs go up like that for Americans, I wouldn't be surprised to see interest rates come back. And that would be tough because interest rates have really been holding back upstream spending in many ways. We got all this money from the CHIPS Act and all these things, the infrastructure bills, and yet we haven't had a ton of shovels in the ground, partly because all of these companies, they don't want to take a construction loan at 8% if they can wait 6 months and get it at 5%. And we're just getting to this place where that could happen. And construction is so important for the freight market because, it takes up a lot of space on trucks, steel and lumber and all these things. And so if we did something that was inflationary early on next year, I think that would really be a drag on the freight economy and would ultimately be a drag on consumers. And this one would be different because unlike kind of the last raft of tariffs, which were more on inputs, this would also be on outputs too. And what I mean by that is the products that are made in China, like shoes and toys and clothing and things like that, would all have this extra cost on them. And I don't know that it makes sense to put costs on those things, because I get why you would put a tariff on chips or batteries or something like that, because we want to build up those domestic industries here. Do you guys know a lot of people in your neighborhood who are like, man, I wish I could work in a blue jeans factory? Do you think that's going to happen? We don't want that. You wouldn't want that by your house. And so that part to me is sort of it's hard to know what's a negotiation tactic and what's real strategy that's going to be implemented. Now the president has a lot of leeway with the tariffs they can put on. So, maybe, if I was kind of doing political strategy, thinking about this ahead of time, I would think tax cuts and deregulation would be the first thing that need to happen, because especially for tax cuts, you need Congress on board. tariffs, you can, if you look at how it happened last time, the tariffs happened 2 years into the Trump administration, partly because those can be executive orders. And so those you can do without Congress. So I think, generally presidents, the things they really want to pass with Congress, you got to do that first before you start having, especially if as tight as the House is probably going to be, you got to do that kind of early, I would think. So the tariffs could be a drag on the economy. And then the other thing is if there really is any sort of deportation, that would be tough. Now, who knows? Well, I mean, that might, again, just be a talking point. Because if you look at why the U.S. economy is so much stronger than every other economy in the world, and it is, we dealt with inflation better than anybody else, and it's not even really close. If you look at China, if you look at Germany, I mean, Germany's been having negative growth in their GDP, and they're the engine of the whole EU. Why is that? Well, in the U.S., what do we have? We have had really over the last 5 years an abundance of energy and an abundance of labor. Okay, we've never produced more oil. We have wind power. There's more energy in the U.S. than we've ever had, and we're getting 6 or 7 million immigrants coming in every year, and so we've had labor. Remember, I mean, one of the things that was inflationary about the pandemic was kind of immigration slowed down quite a bit, and you would go places and they'd be like, "We can't hire anybody." I remember going to like the Taco Bell down the street from my house, closed at 7:00, and there's just like one kid in there. And so a lot of the labor that comes from other places is really important and deflationary to the economy. And so now there's no one political party that says we're for oil and immigrants, unfortunately. That would be great. I would vote for them if that was somebody that existed. If only there was some sort of Congress where they could get together. But so, if we pull back, they're going to go big on energy in this new administration. They might pull back some regulations, and some of those regulations might be sort of a boom for the freight market, especially around, the fuel efficiencies and things like that. I could see that helping some of the carriers. But if we really have a pullback in labor and we put tariffs on, that would be, and this is not me trying to make political points or anything here, but that just, if you look at when we've done those things in the past, that would be inflationary, and you would think that would sort of take some of the wind out of the sails of folks in the logistics market.
So I just let you take a quick go back to the Federal Reserve. You said they really did a really good job. Looks like a soft landing. We've been paying attention to the interest rates. We've been wanting the interest rates to drop, get excited that, okay, they dropped in September and a little bit more than what everybody expected. We've seen in the past it takes usually 6 to 9 months for it to really hit the housing market, really hit the manufacturing side, which are great drivers of freight. Now there's question of, okay, are there going to be more reductions? And even if they make reductions this past week, we started to see bond prices push back up again and driving the interest rates back up and mortgage rates back up. So
right.
What is your thought about all that mix? I like your thought. Well, let's just ride out what we have for a bit and see how that rolls, because right now it looks like it's going to roll nicely, and the recovery is a nice recovery. So what are your thoughts on some of that part?
And I think with that, it's sort of, you need to pay attention to the longer arc and not the day-to-day movements. It's like if you play the stock market goes up over time. Some days it goes down, some days it goes up. And if you live and die by, did my 401k go up or down and I'm moving investments around, eventually you're going to mess something up. I mean, you got to look at sort of the long arc. And I think that's what the Fed has done a good job of doing. I thought they really could have started cutting rates this summer because all of the supply-based inflation was gone. They actually, the San Francisco Fed, they provide a breakout, a guy named Adam Shapiro. It's really an incredible analysis he does, where he shows what percentage of inflation is coming from supply, so supply shortages, or demand, so increase in demands. And supply was actually the main driver of inflation in 22 and late 21. We had the crunch on oil. We had the bird flu that really cut our eggs like crazy. I mean, that's kind of why those got so expensive. And then 8 months later, by the way, we had a shortage in chickens, which I don't know why we didn't see that coming, but we did.
Which like we first, right?
Yeah. And so we've had all these and sort of crunches. Well, supply chains basically have worked out all the kinks. We had a correction and then an overcorrection with our supply chains. It's like during It's kind of like when you're driving a car. I mean, during COVID, we went way too far to one side, and then we overcorrected coming back the other side, just like a car. And then you slowly, like in a car, you slow down those corrections. And now we've kind of gotten all that out of our system. The kinks are gone. And that was really true. That was really true probably by April and March of this year. We probably could have started cutting rates then, but I understand they wanted to be cautious. And so now I think we're seeing some of those effects will really start to come in next year in 2025. And I think the Fed is sort of, you don't want to turn it too much. You don't want to turn the heat up or turn it down too fast, because like you just said, it's a great point. You don't know what the effects will be. They stopped raising rates in the middle of 2023, and we probably saw the end of that tightening impacting us even this fall. And so if you think we've got this really long road, I think the Fed and something Powell has shown is he's cautious. He doesn't want to turn the heat up too fast or turn it down too fast. And I wouldn't be surprised if the noise that we're hearing, they understand the noise is not the overall direction. And so I don't think they would overreact to the news we've had this week, because none of the fundamentals have changed. If fundamentals change, like with tariffs or deportation or anything, then maybe we'll see a change. But I think the Fed would be really happy to just see this play out and slowly lower the temperature over the next 9 months.
Well, that's an interesting, point about how the economy reacts to sort of possibilities. And so we're at the stage where we don't know exactly what's going to happen. One thing we've heard a bit already on the freight side is the concern about the tariffs is already changing some behaviors in terms of volumes there with imports. And it'll be interesting to see also what your respondents say that 12-month outlook is now, with that potential wrench thrown into to the equation.
That's right. And anecdotally, we just had our big partner forum at Colorado State last Friday, and one of the main things we were talking about global trade anyway, because when I was playing it, I thought, well, depending on how the election goes, it's really going to change things. We've got quite a few big OEMs around here in northern Colorado, and almost all of them said, yeah, we're looking at now pulling things forward a little bit.
Yeah, we're hearing the same stuff from our customers.
That could sort of charge up the market in the short term if we really do pull a lot of things forward. I looked at the Port of LA forecast this morning, and for the week of November 17th, I think imports are up like 80% year over year. That shows that we're probably, there will be pulling things forward. Now, again, it's tough to say. Really what the market wants is predictability. It's not that tariffs are good or bad. I mean, I like the free market personally, but we've had some things that we've had tariffs on forever. We've had tariffs on corn for 100 years. We've had tariffs on heavy trucks for 60 years. We can deal with that. So, all right, well, Toyota moves Tundra production to South Carolina. We can get around those things. It's when it's like this is a negotiation tactic and we don't know if the tariff will be here for a month or a year or 2 years. No one is going to go spend a bunch of money to put a factory in Mexico or the US or anywhere if the tariff might disappear in 6 months once we win the trade war. And so that's the piece that I think makes it really tricky kind of to know where we're going. But right now, where there is a little bit of certainty, we do absolutely see firms pulling things forward. Everyone's pulling forward at the same time, though, and that could actually lead to a little bit of a traffic jam that wouldn't be dissimilar maybe from what we saw sort of in 20 or 21, where everybody is trying to pull everything forward as fast as they can.
Yeah, and then the way the rest of the year goes is sort of based on what the actual policies are instead of the predictions.
Right now, we're all just trying to guess, which good luck to anybody else.
Now, speaking of the predictions, though, the other element that's in the LMI every month is that looking ahead 12 months, and that's been getting increasingly optimistic, just as the overall index has been going up.
It has been, yeah. We've got pretty, like you said, a lot of optimism in the overall index. So right now, our prediction for the overall index, taken all together, for the next 12 months, and this again was all response from October, so before the election happened, is 65.4. So that is, the overall average for the index of the 8 years is at 61.8. So 65.4 is just over it, and it's a healthy rate of expansion. That is, and it's a rate of expansion I like, something in the mid 60s, because when we were getting up in the 70s, that was inflationary. Basically, if you add all of our cost numbers together, if you add together inventory cost, warehousing price, and transportation price, at about 150, where they're breaking even, there's no inflation either way. But then if for every 100 points they go up cumulatively, so let's say we go from a 150 to a 250, that correlates with a 3.2% increase in supply inflation on the Federal Reserve's number the next month. So when we're at 270, 280, like we were in late 21, early 22, that's why we were seeing 4 and 5% increases in inflation due to supply. So going forward, I added these up knowing we're going to talk about this. Going forward, we're at about a 68, 73, and 81 for our three metrics. 81 for transportation, 73 for warehousing, and 68 for inventory. So you think that's about what, 220-ish, I think, right? Because 70 is 140, 80, yeah. So about 220. That's 2% inflation. Perfect. Exactly
right.
Where we want to be.
Right.
And so to me, it says, yes, we will have growth. We are going to have an expansionary market in 2025, but we're not getting ahead of our skis. We're not growing so fast that we run into a sort of rupture on the other end, like we did last time when we supercharged the market with these influxes of $1 trillion here, $1 trillion. It doesn't sound much, trillion here, trillion there, but it does add up and really speed up the market. And it's ultimately kind of what led the market to crash, that, and then of course the invasion of Ukraine. And so this sort of buildup we have right now is basically says we're building up at a normal level. And when you break it down even further, and we go upstream and downstream, so we talked about that a minute ago. Downstream being the retail side, upstream being our wholesalers, manufacturers, things like people in construction, things like that. Downstream is actually a little slower. It's at 61.2 for the overall index, which, like we just said, 61.8 is the all-time average. Downstream is exactly where you want it to be. Good, steady recovery. Inventory levels downstream at a 55. That tells us JIT is coming back, and that we're really rotating through inventories, and still strong transportation numbers at 78, but capacity right at 50. Basically, that is we're at perfect sort of synchronicity, right? We're in equilibrium downstream. Upstream, we have a little more growth. That came in at a 68.6, which is right on the high end of what we would term normal growth. So 61.8 is our average. About 8 points either way is our standard deviation. So if you're between 53 and 69, you're either on the lower high ends of normal. So 68 is a pretty normal rate of growth. And that, I think, again, is a reflection of the expectation that interest rates will continue to come down, loosen up some of this CapEx that we haven't seen. And as that CapEx loosens up, now we'll see bigger loads, because of construction, because of things like this, sort of charge up the upstream economy. So this is a one of the rosier future outlooks we've had really since probably 2021 or 2022. And it's rosy in a way that, unlike what we're having in 21, it's not, a pedal to the ground. We're going 900 miles an hour on the highway. We're going 75. Fuel efficiency looks good. We're going to get there on time. Everything is nice and sustainable.
So I've been doing this for a long time. So I've been in logistics for, 3 decades now, which seems, wow, that's really old.
Congratulations.
None of my kids actually followed me. They've seen what I've done, and they said, no, thank you. You had said earlier that your dad had been in logistics, and you followed his way. And yeah, none of my kids have gone that direction.
Sounds smart.
As a matter of fact, one's at Colorado State learning psychology, probably to learn and try to figure out how his dad's brain functioned all these years. But in any case, My question is so you're at Colorado State. You're teaching the students supply chain. LMI, how is that getting in? Because what I've seen over the years is that, right now you're talking, we're in perfect spot. But I've been in this for a long time, and, perfect spot. I always see people overshoot, and it's been happening for years. They overshoot on the inventory side. They overshoot on truckload capacity side. Yeah. And there's always a bullwhip effect that goes on. How the new students, because a lot of us that are older, that have had the bullwhip, have created the bullwhips. There wasn't really logistics and supply chain, courses. It was, operational type courses, and you eventually moved yourself in logistics and supply chain. It's become very important. How are you getting this across to the students so we can see more 75 miles an hour versus, right, going between 150 and 25 and constantly going and hurting ourselves?
Sure. I mean, one thing we do, and it's not just supply chain, every student in the College of Business has to take intro to supply chain now, which is something that, we didn't have when I was growing up. But just like everyone needs to be if you're in business, you need to understand, debits and credits. You need to be able to understand supply chain. Play something called the beer game with them, which is an old game. It's a Howley beer bull game, beer whip bullwhip thing. And basically we do something where we set them all up in a supply chain. We got a retailer, distributor, wholesaler, manufacturer, and then raw materials. And we just change a little bit what the retailer's demand is. We go from 4 to 8. But that 4 to 8, because of the bullwhip effect, because we put big penalties on backlogs, we'll always end up with the manufacturer, usually it's 3 weeks later, having an order of 50 or 60 or something. And we sort of use that to explain it. And we do that early in the semester, and then we start talking about all these stories that we've kind of been talking about over the last couple of years of, well, here's why we had a bullwhip effect for the auto market. Here's why we had it in eggs. Here's why we had it for all the inventory we built up. And it does, I think, it's one of the things, and you never know what a 19-year-old is soaking in at 8 o'clock in the morning, honestly. Right. But the game usually is one of the things I think they remember a little bit. And supply chain is interesting because it's a young discipline. It hasn't been around for, the first supply chain program was at Michigan State in 1965. I mean, it's not that old. We're really the second generation of supply chain professors is happening now, basically. At CSU, we've only been around 10 years. But we've grown really quickly, and partly it's because everyone has a supply chain. There's a lot of demand from employers. And we're trying to give them these tools so they understand it, going forward. And I do think that one thing you always see with supply chains is they learn the lessons of hard times and apply them. We really, I've seen a difference in the way warehousing networks are structured now post-COVID. It's interesting. If you look at where the warehouses are being built now, we kind of filled up Riverside and the Inland Empire. And now we've got big pockets of warehousing in Western Phoenix, Northern Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, all up the I-25 corridor where I live on the Front Range, Dallas, Austin. And what all of this is a move towards kind of a middle mile approach. So during pre-pandemic, everything was JIT, right? Everything's got to be JIT. And then remember during 20 and 21, there was kind of well, is it JIT or is it JIC? Is it just in case? And then we had way too much inventory, and we thought, okay, maybe not all just in case is a good idea either. And now we sort of see companies doing a little bit of both. And here's what I mean by that. So we talked about our upstream, downstream split. Downstream inventories finally just started coming up in September. They had been negative for all summer this year. Very JIT. Okay, we'll build up in September, kind of peak in October, and then disseminate our inventories. Well, upstream, inventories really started building in May, June, July, and got really high. And kind of what we saw is we realized during COVID that we can't just rush everything over the ocean in August anymore. That doesn't work. We run into all these big spikes in cost. And so starting in 21, we started bringing things over early to get ahead of the traffic jams we had at the Port of LA. And we realized if we bring things over early, this is kind of nice. Now we're not paying those big surge prices on the front end. And so we kept doing that, bring them over early. But we also learned the lessons of 2022, which says as retailers, we can't have all this inventory ourselves. I mean, Target had a $2 billion write down in 2022. All right, we don't want to do that again. So how about we bring the wholesalers into it, bring that middle mile piece into it, and we build up all these pockets of inventory, almost like inland versions of sort of the inland empire in Dallas, Phoenix, Vegas, all over the place. And there's also some fulfillment center stuff in there where we're making deliveries. But really, it's sort of shifted a lot of the networks east, and it allows now retailers to have the sort of classic postponement JIT where we're not bringing things in until right before we need it, but we now don't have to worry about it coming across the ocean. And it's a mix of the pre-pandemic and pandemic models. And that to me tells me that we're on the right track. Like we're not just, we didn't just go back to total business as usual. We take lessons, and supply chains, I think more than almost any other industry, takes those lessons and changes their behavior. You know, finance goes through a crisis and then immediately forgets that crises could ever exist and goes back to exactly what they've been doing. Supply chain, I think, is more resilient because you're learning from these mistakes and getting more flexible, getting more nimble, and more effective over time. You know, you guys know, you said you've been in supply chain 30 years. Supply chain is a lot different than they did 30 years ago.
Oh,
we have really changed. It's not all about, well, we'll put a warehouse out in the desert and then drive the truck as far as we can. You know, that was kind of the old model. Now it's, you know, maybe I just talked to someone from the New York Times, I think last week, and we were talking about a fulfillment center for Amazon in Brooklyn in an old apartment building that's mostly making deliveries on bikes. That we didn't have that 20 years ago. But it's, you know, supply chains really change. And I'm so excited about this next generation of kids coming out, because they have, you know, they're really, you know, everyone stands on the shoulders of the generations before them. And they are really now coming into a world that sort of understands that supply chain is important. You know, before the pandemic, I never had students in the freshman class basically say, oh, I want to do supply chain.
Right.
They would learn what supply chain was and then they get excited about it. But starting around 21, I'd have kids come in and say, yeah, you know, my dad, he owns an auto body shop and he said supply chain is his main problem. So I should probably do supply chain and figure that out. And so it's really, you know, to me, this next generation of kids has grown up knowing what supply chain is, seeing these crazy historic shocks. And I'm sure, yeah, there will be mistakes and ups and downs, but they're going to keep applying. And I think the supply chain professionals of the future will keep getting better and better for it.
I'm excited for them as well.
Yeah. So
one last thing, you know, sort of related to the changing of supply chains and changing behaviors over time. You're working on the LMI, you're teaching. You also have done a lot with sustainability, and obviously sustainability and freight are tied together pretty closely, as freight is a major emission causer. So on a very high level, how would you say things are going right now in that regard, and any particular advice for shippers, carriers to sort of improve?
Sure. I mean, you see all the regulatory stuff that's happening with, you know, lowering emissions and things like that. Now, some of that regulation may go away due to the election, but you know, that regulation can be helpful, but it's not a panacea. What has to happen is we need to keep improving technology so things make cost sense. You know, if things make sense in terms of cost, great. I mean, you know, we use boats instead of planes. Boats are much more successful or much more sustainable than planes going over the ocean. Why do you do it? Because they're cheaper. That's why.
Right.
What trains? Okay, why do we use intermodal instead of truck? It's way greener. Well, it's cheaper also. That's why. And so that's what it will always come down to in supply chains. Here's the other thing I'd say about sustainability. Sometimes we get caught up on the environmental side. And of course, the environment is incredibly important. But we see things keep getting better and better. Here's the thing that I don't think we pay enough attention to. There's three pieces of sustainability. The triple bottom line is environmental, social, and economic. We need all three of those to really be sustainable. So if we have environmental without the economic, that's not going to last. So as those come online, and that will take things like building a charging infrastructure, more, you know, green sources of energy, all that stuff. Social, though, is important too. We have way less people. Globalizing supply chain has pulled about 1 billion people out of poverty. Because we have these global supply chains where we're connected, we have factories in places where we wouldn't have put factories before, pulls folks out. You don't have the same sort of retail deserts that maybe you had 50 years ago because you can do deliveries into places. You have distribution models that have really expanded. We have a lot of people working in supply chain, transportation, warehousing, providing economic opportunity. And so, we I don't think it has to be this binary of do we have growth or do we have sustainability? Because I think growth is sustainability in many ways. Now it has to be smart growth and targeted growth and not just growth for the sake of growth. But when supply chains grow, when a big fulfillment center comes into a community, that's jobs, that's social sustainability. And yes, does it always come with environmental sustainability? I don't know. The other piece I would say is for social sustainability, you know, it can't just be about the forward side of supply chain, it's also the reverse side. One of my jobs at Amazon was returns manager. $800 billion in the secondary market every year. That's about 3% of GDP is things that are returned or overstocked that then flow into dollar stores, wholesalers, value retailers, outlets, and provide opportunities in other communities. There's a lot of places in Nevada where I grew up. I grew up in Reno. My wife grew up in Vegas, so I made that drive many times. And there is some desolate places between Reno and Vegas. And some of these, like Hawthorne, Nevada, big military base there, they've got a Dollar General. There's no Walmart, but there's a Dollar General. And it's full of secondary goods that have come through the supply chain. And we have good supply chains for returns and overstocks. It provides opportunities in these places that you wouldn't otherwise have. So yes, sustainability is important, but I think sometimes because we're focusing just on this one piece of it, we can miss a lot of the good that's already happening. And that's natural. You take the good for granted that already exists and you just, okay, well, what's the next thing? There's a lot, I think, that supply chains have done to improve sustainability, not just in the US, but around the world.
Oh, great. I'm sure we could go on for quite a while, but we'll let you go for now. And before we do that, let people know where they can find LMI or anything about Colorado State or your work. Feel free.
Sure. Yeah. So we put all of our reports up. They come out the first Tuesday of every month. And they go up at www.the-lmi.com, the-lmi.com. And our last year of reports are up there for free for anybody who wants to see. The more advanced stuff we put behind a paywall, and we're working on some APIs right now, so you'll be able to call up some more stuff, and ideally in 2025 we'll be able to give people more access to some of the historical things. But if you're interested in the last year reports, those are up for free on our website. If you want to be added to the mailing list, send me a note. Zac, Zac.Rogers, Rogers, at Colo State, COLO state.edu. Cal State got the .csu addresses before we went to Colo State. And send me a note, and I'm happy to add anybody who's interested to the distribution list. We don't make really money off this thing. It's a labor of love for us. So if more people are reading about it, that makes me feel better about staying up all night. Writing about inventory movements.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely are paying attention every month, and yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk about the LMI, how things are going, and how things are looking ahead.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. And next time I'm on, I'll get the memo on the dress code. I'll wear a black button up too. So we can all
right. Love to have you on some more.
Thanks very much.
It'll be a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
So we follow the LMI monthly. We usually do a blog about it because there's so much information there, and it was really great to see the person behind it, one of the people behind it, the head author of the LMI here, telling us more about how it came about and what he's seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the positivity that he has in it right now, based off of the historical, because it's been out long enough now that there's there's enough history and enough cycles to pay attention, because I know when it first came out, people were like, I'm not sure really what this is, and it's really just a survey. And but now that it actually has some meat to it, and is based in some strong correlation, it's a great tool that we look at least. And as you said, we publish information every month when it comes out because we're trying to help other people understand the importance of it.
Yeah, it's we've had our own conversations here on the podcast as well about how the market's doing, catalysts, things of that nature, and it does look like everything's sort of coming together to some level of consensus as to what's going forward now.
Yeah, and a lot of what we're starting to see is other people are calling it out based off of other measures. So it's great to see different tools out there, and all the tools are coming up with pretty much the same response, which is we're starting to turn the corner and getting out of the 2-year freight recession.
Yep. Hopefully we're there.
Hopefully there. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, the LMI, a great tool. We definitely recommend checking that out towards the beginning of every month. They have that last month's data. They're really good about getting it out there just a few days into the month too. Right. So you're not going, oh, that was 3 weeks ago. No, this is just a couple days ago.
Right.
So definitely recommend that. And thanks again to Zac for joining us on the podcast. If you have any questions for us, feel free to drop a comment. We certainly appreciate any ratings and reviews, and please do subscribe however you consume the podcast, whether you are watching or listening on your favorite platform. You can also email us at podcast@intechlogistics.com with any questions or comments as well. And visit our website, www.intekfreight-logistics.com, for more about what we do. For Rick Legore, I'm Kevin Baxter. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.